Did you know that for most of our nation's history, there hasn't been a tax on people's incomes? In fact, after the American Revolution, there was no nationwide tax system at all. Each state raised its own taxes. Let me show you something. I'm looking for a photograph. States even taxed each other. Now, yes, here it is. We didn't even have an Office of Internal Revenue until 1862. The first commissioner, George S. Boutwell, started out in a tiny office in the Treasury Department with one clerk to help him. In the beginning, he read every single letter that came from taxpayers. Can you imagine the commissioner trying to do that now? Oh, that must be Doug, my next-door neighbor. Come on in.
Hi, just thought I'd return these.
Look, you're an accountant. We were just talking about taxes. Maybe you could tell us something about how the tax system evolved.
Well, for one thing, it evolved because of our country's need to finance wars and to pay for other government services, like coining money, enforcing laws. We needed revenue, plain and simple.
I see.
And of course, it was influenced by our government's desire to be fair to different income groups. And then our tax system also evolved through attempts to influence people's behavior.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it sure is. Listen, I've got to run. Thanks for the manuals.
Don't mention it. You know, most of us associate taxation with our federal income tax. Yet, this federal income tax wasn't part of our Constitution until 1913. Now, how did the government fund itself before then? The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy pig. No. Hello. Under the Articles of Confederation, the government didn't fund itself. For its revenue, the new government relied on donations from the states. Well, this system didn't work very well. And when the government under the Constitution was established in 1789, Congress was granted the authority to levy or raise taxes. To pay for the debts of the Revolutionary War, Congress enacted import duties and passed excise taxes on distilled spirits, tobacco, and snuff, refined sugar, and other items. These taxes were passed to raise revenue, but the taxes on whiskey and tobacco were also attempts to influence behavior. Excise taxes made these products more expensive to discourage consumption. Needless to say, the new taxes weren't very popular to some people. In 1794, a group of farmers in southwestern Pennsylvania physically opposed the tax on whiskey.
John, it's finally happened.
What?
We've tarred and feathered Henry Walker, the tax collector.
When?
This morning. It couldn't be helped. The government's gone too far with their taxes on spirits.
Meaning?
Who are they to tell us what to do? We're businessmen, John, just like Washington himself.
President Washington won't stand for this. He'll send troops.
Let him. We're ready.
President Washington did send troops to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion, and the message was clear. The new federal government was determined to enforce its power to collect taxes. The War of 1812 created the need for additional federal revenue. Again, Congress passed excise taxes on certain items. You know, many of the important events in the history of our tax system occurred because of the need for additional revenues to finance wars. For instance, the Civil War brought about a major change. It wasn't until the Civil War, or the war between the states, that a federal tax on personal income of individual citizens was passed. This tax was very controversial, and it was abolished by 1872. For a long time after the Civil War, there were no federal income taxes. An 1894 income tax was declared unconstitutional in 1895. The Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution would have to be changed if there was to be a federal income tax that was not apportioned according to the population of each state. The pressure for a federal income tax came from several sources. Many people were concerned with tax fairness, and argued that tariffs and excise taxes were regressive taxes. Let me show you what I mean. A regressive tax takes a larger percentage of taxes from low incomes than high incomes.
John, I have something here for you to sign. It is a petition to amend the Constitution to provide for a fair income tax for all, one that doesn't fall hardest on the poor.
A fair income tax?
Finally, people will be taxed according to their incomes. We're collecting as many signatures as possible to present to the state legislature when they vote on ratification next week. Will you sign?
Sounds like a progressive tax to me.
What is that?
Here, I'll show you. A progressive tax takes a larger percentage of taxes from high incomes than low incomes. By 1913, 36 states had ratified the 16th Amendment, making it a part of the United States Constitution. The federal income tax was here to stay. But at first, less than 1% of the population, the most wealthy people, were required by law to pay the new federal income tax.
When the law was passed, the Internal Revenue Service organized a personal income tax division. Establishing this division proved to be exactly what was needed since our country was on the brink of another war.
During World War I, the new income tax was increased. Income taxes eventually raised 1/3 of the revenue needed to finance the war, but still only 5% of the population had to pay income taxes. Business boomed during the 1920s. As the economy expanded, revenue from the personal income tax also grew. Congress cut tax rates 5 times, but still collected enough money to run the government because of the expanding peacetime economy. The Great Depression of the 1930s changed the nature of our entire economy. Income tax revenue fell, and the Social Security Act provided for payments to workers who lost their jobs, as well as public aid to the aged, the handicapped, and the needy. World War II had another major impact on the federal income tax system. The coverage of the income tax was vastly expanded.
Rates were raised, and employer withholding of income tax payments, or pay-as-you-earn, became what now seems a permanent part of our federal income tax system.
Yes, I understand. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Now, what's wrong, Doug? You look worried.
Well, I received a letter from the Internal Revenue Service this morning. I'm going to have to start withholding taxes from my employees' paychecks, and that's going to make me real popular.
Doug, for crying out loud. It's 1943. There's a war on. Won't they understand?
Yeah, sure, you're right. They'll understand if they know their taxes are going to finance the war effort. But when the war's over, we better have a tax cut or two, or people are going to start complaining.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
What Doug was describing was the beginning of the pay-as-you-earn system. One way of making it easier for taxpayers to meet their tax obligations within a system of voluntary compliance. Voluntary compliance relies on individual citizens to report their incomes, calculate their tax liabilities, and file a tax return on time.
The tax cuts Doug was hoping for after the war didn't happen. Needs for continuing national defense expenditures and a set of greatly expanded social programs after World War II prevented frequent tax reductions like those that occurred after World War I. In the post-World War II period, our government continued to use the federal tax system to influence the behavior of taxpayers. By granting tax exemptions, deductions, and credits in order to encourage certain socially desirable activities. For instance, to encourage people to buy homes, homeowners are given tax deductions for the interest payments on their home mortgages.
to encourage contributions to charitable institutions like churches, schools, and social welfare organizations, people are allowed to deduct their contributions from their taxable income if they itemize deductions. All these attempts to use our tax system to influence behavior meant less revenue for the government. At the same time, more and more people were complaining that our tax laws were unfair to certain groups of taxpayers. As a result, a major tax reform law was passed in 1986, aimed at collecting the same amount of revenue by broadening the tax base while lowering the tax rates. The tax base was broadened by eliminating some of the deductions and tax credits that had been previously allowed.
John, you're working on your taxes, right? Have you checked out the new tax laws?
Yeah, I've checked.
Before, you could deduct state sales taxes. You can't do that anymore.
I know that.
Yeah, but I was going to buy a new car this year. But if I can't deduct the sales tax, I don't know. It sure will make a difference in how much I spend, I can tell you that.
Well, it's tough, I'll admit that. But you know, the thing is, eliminating deductions like sales tax gives the federal government greater revenue at a time when it really needs it. Anyway, you're paying a lower tax rate. Doesn't that help?
Yeah, it will. Maybe I'll even come out ahead.
Since those days when the 16th Amendment was first passed and only 5% of the population paid income tax, the income tax-paying population has grown by leaps and bounds. Today, millions of taxpayers practice voluntary compliance by filing income tax returns each year. The amount of tax they owe represents their fair share. Remember, our federal income tax is a progressive tax. With our system of voluntary compliance, the government also has a responsibility to administer the tax laws fairly and process returns accurately and efficiently. How is this accomplished? Returns are delivered to one of several IRS service centers. High-speed machines open the envelopes and sort the returns by type. Next, returns are reviewed for completeness and edited and coded for computer processing. Then they are matched with the millions of statements from employers, banks, and financial institutions showing wages, interest, and dividends. This matching process is yet another way to make sure everyone pays their fair share. Throughout this process, checks are made for accuracy. The pipeline is part of the IRS's effort to make the voluntary compliance system work. Of course, income tax laws will continue to change. As we found out, when the needs of our society change, so do our tax laws. But what won't change is the constant desire to produce a system of taxation that raises revenue, that is basically fair to different income groups, and that attempts to influence behavior. Gosh, I didn't realize it was so late. I need to get back to work. But thanks for dropping by.
The content of Understanding Taxes was developed in cooperation with the Joint Council on Economic Education and school and economic education agencies from the entire United States. Funding was provided by the Internal Revenue Service. Facilities for this production were provided by Steve Yeager Films. This program was produced in cooperation with Action Productions Incorporated. Understanding Taxes was produced by the Agency for Instructional Technology.